We're going to close out today by looking at the text in the book of John. This is our last part of the journey for this particular sermon series that has focused on the 7 signs of the glory of Jesus. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to read some of the text today, but so this story takes place in John chapter 11, and I'm gonna kind of like do it backwards today. So there's gonna be a spoiler alert. I don't know if you know this about a guy named Lazarus, but he gets raised from the dead. So I'm sorry to tell you ahead of time. But since I assumed probably you've already heard at least the rumor of that or have read this story before, I'm going to begin at the end of the story, at the end of John 11, in verse 45. So if you have your phone or the Bible in front, you might want to follow along just because there's a lot of text here. And what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to walk through the text and narrate it a little bit. So I want to start by reading the end. What happens after Lazarus is risen from the dead, this climactic miracle of Jesus. This is what happened because of that. John 11:45. The result of all this was that several of the Judeans who had come to Mary and who had seen what he had done, speaking of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, believed in him. But some of them went off to the Pharisees and told what Jesus had done. So some believed, and some went and told the Pharisees, "You won't believe what this guy just did." So the chief priests and the Pharisees called an assembly. The Pharisees were kind of an influential minority in this day in the Jewish culture, how it worked. They were kind of spiritual leaders in the community, but they didn't have the political power. For that, they had to go to the priests who were Sadducees. It was kind of the Sanhedrin, or kind of the ruling class, and that was led by the chief priest. And so the Pharisees had to get the chief priest, the Sanhedrin, together, this assembly, so they could make some decisions, some actual political decisions about Jesus and what he was up to and what he was doing. So they're in their assembly, and they say, "What are we going to do?" They ask. This is verse 47. "This man," speaking of Jesus, "is performing lots of signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone is going to believe in him. Oh no." Then the Romans, here was their problem. They didn't mind, it wasn't a problem with them believing in Jesus. This is what they were concerned about. Then the Romans, and the Romans were actually in charge, will come and take away our holy place and our nation. Now, the holy place was the temple. This was the pride and joy of the Jewish people, especially the religious leaders. It had taken a long time to be built. And so they were nervous that Rome was going to come and take away their temple and crush the nation of Israel. But one of them, Caiaphas, the high priest that year, addressed them. "You know nothing at all," he said. "You haven't worked it out. This is what's best for you. Let one man die for the people rather than the whole nation being wiped out." So Caiaphas says this statement that means one thing to the people gathered there. Oh yeah, we can take him out instead of having the wrath of Rome on our nation as a whole. We'll let the wrath of Rome fall on one man. But what Caiaphas doesn't know is that he's actually prophesying in this moment, because what he says is more real than he realizes. He didn't say this out of his own accord, verse 51 says. Since he was the high priest that year, it was a prophecy. It meant that Jesus would die for the nation, and not only for the nation, ethnos, but to gather into one the scattered children of God, laos. There's two Greek words that are describing the nation as a whole and then the people as a whole. Now, from that day on, they plotted how to kill him. So I want you to stop right there. So this is the end of the story, that this all kind of goes down because of the extreme wow factor of this final story and these story signs of who Jesus is. And so I want to invite you, just before we talk about this story that has such an impact, that the Jewish leaders gather with the priest class and they say, we have got to take Jesus out. It comes on the heels of this climactic story, this final seventh sign of Jesus' glory. So would you pray with me and let's consider this together. Lord, as we just take a few minutes to pause, take some deep breaths, open our hearts up to the beauty of who Jesus is, the power, the authority that Jesus brings to the table. God, I pray that you would just allow us to see his beauty and glory this morning. We can't make that happen in our own hearts, so we ask, God, that you would open up our eyes so that we would see the greatness and the beauty of Jesus himself. And it's in your name we pray. Amen. So there's a quote I'm gonna give you. This is, C.S. Lewis. Anybody know C.S. Lewis? Kind of famous, wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. Okay, he's a great thinker from the past. But he said this. He said, ideas are the organ of truth. And when he says organ, he's talking, think of like the heart organ that's pumping things, okay? Like ideas are the engine of truth. He called it the organ. He said, but imagination is the organ of meaning. Okay, that one you need to write on your wall and process it for a little bit. But there's only ideas are great, and they make up, ideas and propositions make up truth, okay? And we can put these truths in our head. So you can come to church and I can hit you with a bunch of ideas. Boom, boom, boom. Idea 1, idea 2, idea 3, proposition 2, proposition 3, proposition 4. And you could have this like list in your head, this nice little list of ideas and propositions. But what C.S. Lewis is saying is, if somehow we can tap into your imagination with images and stories, then we can get to the heart of meaning. Okay? To me, that seems like a better option. So when we go to the scriptures, what I want to do is I want your imaginations to be lit up. Because I want you to be able to tap into meaning. What does this mean as a reality in my life? Not just what are these ideas that I can say, yep, I understand that one, I understand that one, I understand that one, I read a book on that one, check, 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 check. Not, those ideas are great, and they're the engine of truth. But I think what John is doing in his gospel, describing the life of Jesus, is I think he is giving us all these stories to ignite our imagination. And he's given us so far 6 stories, and I have them all expertly, drawn for you right here, because I am a world-renowned artist. And so maybe you can see these and interpret them. I will explain them to you at the end. But if you've been following along with us for the last 6 weeks, these should ring a bell of what they mean. They're like little icons, okay? They represent the 6 stories that John has been walking us through. Because he's not just giving us ideas or truth. You notice that? This isn't like a textbook. He's telling us stories because he wants to awaken our imagination to the glory of Jesus, which is what we've been trying to do for the last 6 weeks. And now we're at the mountaintop of John awakening our imagination to the glory of Jesus. Now, this is not a new thing. One of my favorite television shows, one of the greatest shows of all time. Well, there's 2 greatest shows of all time, in my humble opinion. The Andy Griffith Show. Sorry if you disagree with me. You're wrong, okay? The Andy Griffith Show, seasons 2 through 6, and The Office. Those are the 2 greatest shows, comedy, that I've ever seen. And by the way, I've seen them multiple times, so I can quote pretty much all of them. But one of the Andy Griffith episodes that was interesting to me in light of this was an episode called Andy Discovers America. And basically, he makes some comments to his son about how history is difficult, and his son shouldn't worry about the difficulty of history, in studying it in school. So his son goes to school and basically says, my dad said that history isn't important and I don't need to study it. So his teacher gets ripped at, the dad obviously, and so she comes and she gives him a piece of his mind, and so he realizes he's done something wrong, he's got to fix this, he's got to turn not only his son, because now his son has the whole class thinking that history doesn't matter, so he's got to turn his son from history doesn't matter to history is awesome. Okay, so how does he do it? Does he sit them down and say, son, history is important? There's your big idea. Is that how he does it? No. The show is he sits down with them and he tells them the story of the founding of America. And he kind of adds a little creativity to it. He doesn't tell a great historical account of it, but it's compelling, and the kids are sitting there listening to him tell this story of the founding of America, and they're like, oh my goodness, there's all this action and adventure. And so by the time he's done, they're like, where did you get that story? And he's like, I found it in your history book. And there it is. Now they're hungry for history because their imaginations have been awakened to the wonder of history. And this is exactly what John has been doing. He hasn't just told us ideas or theology about Jesus. He's awakening our imagination because of the awesomeness of what Jesus has done in these 6 signs. He turns water to wine. Some guy comes and says, my son is sick, and he sends him, but before the guy even gets home, the son is already cured. Here's a dude who is lame and laying on a mat for years and can't get into this pool that supposedly has miraculous powers, and Jesus comes and says, take up your mat and walk. You don't even need to go into the pool. I am the pool. I am the refreshing and healing waters that you need. 5 little barley stacks of bread and 2 little side dish fishes, pickled fish, is all Jesus has for probably 20,000 people, because we talked about the fact that there were 5,000 men, and back in this day, they didn't count the women and children in the official tallies. So there were probably 20,000 people, and Jesus takes the 5 barley loaves and the 2 little side dish fishes that was common for a Jewish person to have as kind of like a little side dish, and he expands it to feed thousands with leftovers. I know these pictures are disturbing. Did you guys get that? Those are fish? Yeah, if you misinterpreted it, it's totally fine, okay? This one is an obvious one, right? Jesus is walking on the water, the storm, okay? You got that one? Jesus literally stills the storm. His disciples are freaked out as he comes to them in the middle of the storm in the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus is the one whose glory silences the waters and silences the storm and brings them safely to the other side. And then finally, the 6th sign. Here's a man who is, that's not a karate, thing. That's a blindfold. I was just trying to give you the clue. That's an I with an X, so he's blind. So there's a person who's born blind. He's born blind. From birth, he's not able to see. And so Jesus takes the mud on his hands and spits in the dirt and puts the mud on his eyes, sends him to wash it off, and the man his sight is restored. All these stories, why doesn't John just tell us some facts about Jesus? Because he wants to awaken our imagination to the wonder and the glory of Jesus. So here's the last story that is supposed to awaken our hearts. There was a man in Bethany, this is John 11, verse 1. There was a man in Bethany named Lazarus, and he became ill. Bethany was the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Now, John gives us a little insight into who this Mary and Martha is. We learn about them in chapter 12, but John wants us to know so we can kind of put the connections together. This was the Mary who anointed the Lord with myrrh and wiped his feet with her hair. Lazarus was ill and was her brother. Okay, so now you know this is the Mary that later on is the famous story. She takes the expensive perfume and pours it over Jesus' feet in an act of worship and love and reverence, cleans his feet with very costly perfume, and then wipes it with her hair. Like, this is an act of complete and utter worship. So the sisters sent messengers to Jesus. Master, they said, the man you love is ill. John is wanting us to see that this is a close friend of Jesus, because he talks about Lazarus as the man that Jesus loved. He talks about Mary as the woman that Jesus loves, and Martha. These are the friends that are very close to Jesus. Verse 4, when Jesus got the message, he said, the illness won't lead to death. It's all about the glory of God. The Son of God will be glorified through it. So he's saying this to the disciples. So this is where Jesus is compared to where Mary and Martha is like a 95-mile journey. They send a message to him and say, Mary and Martha say, your friend Lazarus, whom you love, is ill. And the implication is obviously, come and heal him. You are the great healer, as these stories attest to. All you have to do is come and heal him. And Jesus makes this statement to the disciples. This illness won't lead to death. Isn't that a strange statement? Because that's exactly where it would lead. It's all about the glory of God. The Son of God will be glorified through it. So what Jesus is signaling to his disciples is that this is a setup for glory. That's what all these have been, isn't it? They've been setups so that we can see the glory. This is why I brought these out. Okay, again, my hula hoops. I promise you, if you're newer here, I will not be hula hooping. Okay, so we use these as an illustration of what is happening with Jesus, and it's like a Venn diagram. We've done this many times before. Okay, so this is the present age. This is the space and time we live in, and this is the age to come. We know a lot about the age to come from the scriptures, and the Jewish people had a whole literary imagination based on the age to come, the resurrection that would come. But what we see in the scriptures is that Jesus brings the age to come into our present age, so that Jesus is in this overlap. This is what Jesus is doing. But what these stories are doing for us, each one of these stories, have you guys ever had an issue with your battery, and so you get the battery cables out? Do you guys do this yourself, or have somebody do it? Well, if you've ever seen somebody do it, at least when I do it, I take the battery cables and I put them to the car that has a good battery charge, and then to make sure that I have some spark, sometimes, because it's also fun, I touch them together. You guys do this? You don't do that? It's so much fun, okay? So you just touch them together, because then if it sparks, number one, it's just kind of cool, but number two, then you know that you got some charge. So after I do my little spark, then I put them on. Okay, I don't know if that's good or not, but I enjoy it. It probably started when I was younger, because you take the little batteries, the 9-volt batteries, and you stick your tongue to them. Did you guys ever do that? That's fun too. It's a lot of fun. That's probably my problem. Spend a little too much time with batteries. But anyway, that little spark you get, and that spark you get when you take those two cables and together, that's what's happening in each one of these stories. John is trying to show you that what's happening is this. The age to come, where Jesus reigns and has authority and his glory is dominant, is breaking in on this present age, and it's creating this spark we call a miracle. And so he does this 6 times for us, and this next time, he's going to do it in even grander fashion. So not just little sparks, but it's going to be like fireworks. So much so that the religious leaders of that day are going to run for cover to say, we got to get rid of this guy, because too many people are going to believe in him. The stuff he's doing is too mind-blowing. So Jesus says, this is another setup. This is going to show the glory that God has given to the Son, because the Son and the Son and the Father, they work for each other's glory. So this is what it says. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister Mary and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was ill, he stayed where he was to begin with for 2 days. You get the idea? Messenger comes, Jesus, Mary and Martha say, Lazarus is sick. You got to come. Heal him, please, now, quickly. Jesus goes, this is a setup for a glory. Let's just hang out here for a couple of days. This is the family that he loves. So he intentionally delays this work that he can do. He delays the movement of God on Lazarus' behalf for glory and love. So you have this potential death. Lazarus is ill. If you don't come, he's going to die. You have this delay from Jesus. Now you have this reality that Jesus is eventually going to go where Mary and Martha and Lazarus live. The problem is if he goes back that way, that's close to Jerusalem. And Jesus has already done something that made all the religious leaders really upset at him, so much so they wanted to stone him. And this wasn't just a figure of speech. They literally would have stoned him because he claimed to be one with the Father. And that for them was blasphemy. And so Jesus had escaped in chapter 10. Now they're like 95 miles away from Jerusalem. They're going to go back toward that area because Bethany's just like a couple miles from Jerusalem, and they're going to be in the same region where all the people wanted to stone Jesus. And so it says in verse 7, then after that, he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. This is like about a 3-day journey. Teacher, replied the disciples, the Judeans were trying to stone you just now. Surely you don't want to go back there. Jesus says this, there are 12 hours in the day, aren't there? If you walk in the day, you won't trip, because you'll see the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, they will trip up, because there is no light in them. So, like, every time Jesus was like, what is he talking about? So the Jewish people and the Roman people, they divided the days into 2 parts. 12 hours of sunlight and 12 hours of darkness. They didn't have like watches like mine to say what time it is. So this is kind of how they divided up the day. And Jesus says the way that you work is when it's light, you get out, you do your things, you can see clearly, and you get a lot done. When it's dark, you can't get a lot done because you're going to be falling over yourself, tripping over things. And Jesus is trying to say to them, we are living in the middle of the day because I'm here. Remember, he's already said, I'm the light of the world. So since I'm here, it's daytime, we've got to keep moving, we've got to keep working for the glory of God. So he says, when he said this to them, Jesus added, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going to go wake him up. Now, what do you think the disciples thought about that? Jesus says, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, I'm going to go wake him up. And they say, Master, if he's asleep, he'll be all right. We don't need to wake him up. Let's stay here where it's safe and not go close to the people who want to stone you just to go wake up your friend. He can wake up himself. Mary and Martha can wake him up. They thought he was referring to ordinary sleep, verse 13 says, but Jesus had in fact been speaking of his death. Jesus was basically saying, he's dead. So then Jesus spoke to them plainly, verse 14, which, by the way, wasn't Jesus' typical approach. He didn't just give them plain ideas most of the time. He usually spoke in kind of cryptic ideas and images and riddles and parables, but here he says it plainly to them. Lazarus, he said, is dead. Actually, I'm glad I wasn't there for your sake. It will help your faith, but let's go to them. I love this part. Thomas, now the name Thomas should strike a little chord in our hearts for those of us who have read some of the Gospels. There was a guy named Thomas who has a nickname. Anybody remember what his nickname is? Doubting Thomas. Here's Thomas before he got the nickname Doubting Thomas. Thomas, whose name was the twin, addressed the other disciples. Let's go too, he said. We may as well die with him. So here's Thomas with devotion and even courage. This is important. Like Thomas later is going to be the one who's doubting. Unless I see the scars in his hands and the scar on his side, I won't believe that he's risen from the dead. Here's Thomas saying, let's go with him and die. Let's go to the very end with him and die with him. So here's Thomas with courage and devotion for Jesus. So when Jesus arrived, this would be probably on the fourth day, like a 3-day journey. Back in this day, they did about 20 to 25 miles a day. So it was a long journey. He found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now this is really important. After 4 days, so that there was these kind of ideas that in this culture that kind of like the soul would kind of hover over the body for 3 days. And once 3 days had happened, something in the body starts to happen to somebody who's dead, that the decomposition is a little more intense. And so after 3 days, it's kind of clear that there's no coming back from this. And there was like hints and rumors about people like on day 2 kind of like being resuscitated and things. So Jesus intentionally waits till the time when it is absolutely clear that Lazarus is physically dead. He arrives on day 4. It's over. The body has already started decomposing. And Jesus shows up. Bethany was near Jerusalem, verse 18, about 2 miles away. Many of the Judeans had come to Mary and Martha to console them about their brother. So Mary and Martha and Lazarus were part of a family that were well known. They were well off. And so back in this day, when you had a funeral, if you were poor, you hired one woman who would be a wailer. They would just come to wail and to cry and to weep. And then you hired 2 flute players. So you had 3. So this is how it worked in this culture. If you had a funeral and you were poor, you hired 2 flute players and 1 woman wailer. But Mary, Martha, and Lazarus and their family were not poor, so you can just imagine what the orchestra would have been like and how many women wailers they would have had. It would have been crazy and intense. And so not only that, but because they were so well known in the community, a lot of people had come from Jerusalem, which wasn't too far away. So many of the Judeans had come to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus had arrived, she went to meet him. Mary, meanwhile, stayed sitting at home. Verse 21, "Master," said Martha to Jesus, "if you'd only been here, then my brother wouldn't have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask for." Now, we don't know exactly what Martha is saying by that. She wasn't saying, Jesus, if you want Lazarus to rise from the dead, you can do that. That wasn't even an option. We know that later because of what she says. She's like, don't open the tomb because he's going to stink. There's no concept in their mind of Lazarus being risen from the dead. He's been dead for 4 days. It's done. It's over. But Martha wants Jesus to know that she still trusts him. If he would have been there, he could have healed Lazarus. And then Jesus says to him, "Your brother will rise again," replies Jesus. "I know he'll rise again," said Martha, "in the resurrection on the last day." See, she's not thinking of now. This is done. But the Jewish people believed, especially the Pharisees and the common Jewish people believed in something called the resurrection of the last day. And that is that God would one day come and set everything right. And he would restore everything. And this comes from the prophecies of Isaiah and Ezekiel. And so they believed that there was going to be a bodily, physical resurrection for all God's people. That God's people would have their bodies restored and they would rise again. This is what the common understanding of resurrection was. And then Jesus says this to her, "I am the resurrection and the life." Verse 25. "Anyone who believes in me will live even if they die. And anyone who lives and believes in me will never, ever die. Do you believe this?" Now, he's asking her to believe a lot. He's asking her to believe that he himself embodies the power and glory of resurrection. All that she imagines resurrection to be in the future, he is the embodiment. He is the power source for all of that. And all that she understands life and fullness and energy and vitality and beauty to be, he is the one who is able to divvy that out so that someone can take that life into themselves and never experience death. this is like mind-boggling stuff. You can imagine he says this to Martha at a funeral, and he asks her, do you believe this? She says, yes, Master, or yes, Rabbi, yes, teacher, yes, Lord. This is what I've come to believe, that you are the Messiah. She gives 3 points, that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, and the one who has come into the world. She didn't really answer his question specifically about the whole resurrection life, but she answered what she did know at that point. She said, I believe in you, Jesus. Here's what I believe. I believe that you are a Messiah. You're the promised one from the Hebrew Scriptures that will come and bring God's will to this place. I believe that you are the Son of God, that you are in a unique way in unity with God. And then I believe that you are the one who has come into the world. With these words, Martha went back and called her sister Mary. The teacher has come, she said to her privately, and he's asking for you. And when she heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Jesus hadn't gone to the village. He was still in the place where Martha had met him. The Judeans who were in the house with Mary, consoling her, saw her get up quickly and go out. They guessed that she was going to the tomb to weep there, so they followed her. A lot of them were being paid. So they're like, Mary's going out. She must be going to the tomb. Let's take our weeping there. So they all go out, this is not a joke. This is real. They're literally weeping for money, and this is just how you were expressing what was going on in the hearts of these family members by expressing it outwardly. They maybe didn't have the energy or the emotion to have you ever been through a really sad point and you don't even have the ability to cry anymore? You're just stunned. And so they're expressing outwardly what these people are feeling inwardly. And so here's this whole crowd of people, mourners and weepers and instrumentalists coming, following Mary. When Mary came to where Jesus was, she saw him and fell down at his feet. Master, she said, if you'd only been here, my brother wouldn't have died. When Jesus saw her crying and the Judeans who had come with her crying, he was deeply stirred in his spirit and very troubled. Now let me ask you a question. We only have a couple minutes here. I wish we had 15 more minutes, but we don't. Why do you think Jesus is troubled when he knows he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead? Jesus knows what he's about to do. He's already hinted at it multiple times. But here he sees Mary on her knees weeping, and he sees this weeping group of people with their instruments, and they're weeping and they're wailing at in this tomb ceremony. And the text says that Jesus is deeply troubled in his spirit. Where have you laid him, he asked. Master, they said, come and see. And Jesus burst into tears. Now here's my question. Why? Why does Jesus burst into tears? Why does Jesus weep when he knows he's going to call Lazarus out of that grave? Why is he crying? He should be like, they're flutes and they're crying. He's not. He is deeply moved to the point where we only see this twice. In all the accounts we have of Jesus, he cries twice. Once over Jerusalem because they've turned their back and they've missed their time of visitation. And once here at this funeral. Why is he weeping? The people there, they thought they knew why. Verse 36, look, said the Judeans, see how much he loved him. They thought he was moved because of emotion, because he'd lost his good friend. Well, yes, said some of them, but he opened the eyes of a blind man, didn't he? Couldn't he have done something to stop this fellow from dying? If he had wanted to, he could have healed him. He could have got here and healed him, and he didn't. Jesus was once again deeply troubled with himself. He went to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was placed in front of it. Take away the stone, said Jesus. But Master, said Martha, the dead man's sister, there'll be a smell. It's the 4th day already. Didn't I tell you, said Jesus, that if you believed, you would see God's glory? So they took the stone away. Jesus lifted up his eyes, Thank you, Father, he said, for hearing me. I know you always hear me, but I've said this because of the crowd standing around me, so that they may believe you sent me. Do you see this is all a setup? We're doing this, Lord, for Father, we're doing this for the crowds because they need to see that you have sent me. They need to see the spark of glory, and they need to see it in dramatic fashion. 6 times. And now the 7th one is going to literally blow their minds. With these words, he gave a loud shout, "Lazarus, come out." And the dead man came out. He was tied up, hands and foot, with strips of linen, and his face was wrapped in a cloth. "Untie him," said Jesus, "and let him go." So Lazarus, I don't know if you've seen, things about this, but the way that the Jewish people did this is they wrapped them in these large pieces of cloth. They weren't incredibly tight. They were kind of more, they were laid on them and they were kind of wrapped around them. But probably what happened was he's like hopping out. It would have been unbelievable. Jesus calls him by name, and then wrapped in kind of these, as the linen clothes are like falling off, he's hopping out of the tomb, and Jesus is like, somebody untie him. You can just imagine this scene. He's been in there 4 days. The result of this was that several of the Judeans who had come to Mary and who had seen what he had done believed in him. Now here's where this is all going. I think what Jesus is doing, I think what John is doing, is he wants us to see in each one of these the contact that Jesus makes with us in our mess. So here in the water turning to wine, we see Jesus in all our deficiencies. We don't have enough. We don't have enough resources. We don't have enough that we need just to make life work. This is a wedding, and we still don't have enough. At the time we should have the most overflow, we're deficient. Jesus' glory is seen in our deficiencies. And then here, this is a father who is completely desperate for his son's healing. He has a sick son in bed. Many of us have experienced this with our children. They're sick, lying in bed, and nobody can help them. And so Jesus visits him in the middle of his desperation. He is a father desperate for healing for his son, and Jesus visits his glory, touches down in the middle of desperation. And then here you have a man who's been lying in this space for years and years because he can't get into the magical pool. He's completely helpless. No one will help carry him into the pool. And so Jesus' glory meets him in the middle of his helplessness. And then here you have thousands and thousands of people who are famished, who are empty, that need filling. And Jesus meets these people in the middle of their famishment. And then you have disciples who are fearful for their life on the storm because they're in the middle of this horrible storm, the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus walks on the water and says, "Fear not." He meets them in the middle of their fearfulness. And then Jesus comes to a person who is completely hopeless. He's been blind since birth. Nobody on the planet can help him. He is 100% hopelessly blind, and Jesus meets him in his hopelessness. Now, at the pinnacle of glory, Jesus meets someone in the midst of death. He literally calls him out of death. I think what John is saying is if you don't see the glory of Jesus yet, your heart is hardened or blind. I don't know what the problem is, but here are 7 touch points for the glory and the beauty of Jesus. And it's not just far removed from us. It's right in the middle of the messiness and the fearfulness and the brokenness and the hopelessness and the helplessness of our human problem and predicament. So here's the point. If Jesus can meet all these individuals in the middle of their mess with his glory, we can experience the glory of Jesus in the middle of our mess. And for me, that is really good news. Because I've got a week full of mess that I'm looking toward. How about you guys? But here's what Jesus wants to remind us. He will meet us in the middle of all our messiness. His glory touches the real problems and brokenness of our lives. And it's not just facts. That's why these are stories, to excite our imagination about what God's glory looks like when it touches in our life. And so I want to invite you this week, as you're going through your week, that you open up your heart, the territory of your heart, to the glory of Jesus. That you set your phone, or pause and take deep breaths, or just have a moment of silence, whatever it is, that you open up your heart to the glory of Jesus and say, Lord, I want to experience and see that glory in the brokenness of my life, like these people experienced in these stories of John. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes?